Welcome everybody to the 2024 Round Hill Association Candidates Forum. I'm Brendan DeSimone, and I'm the president of the Round Hill Association, and I'll be moderating this evening. I want to thank the Round Hill Association board member, Lee Retzler, who works tirelessly year in, year out to organize this forum. Thank you. For any of you who are new to the area, the Round Hill Association was founded in 1942 to, quote, preserve and enhance the quality of life in our vicinity and the town as a whole. RHA encompasses some 1,100 diverse households in the area. In September, we organized an exclusive tour of the Seven Bridges Art Museum on John Street. Last weekend, we hosted Backcountry Neighborhood Day. And on October 30th, we have our first annual Costumes, Candy, and Cars Halloween event for children on the grounds of St. Barnabas Church. We're very excited. In addition to social events, we keep a watchful eye on local issues that affect our community, including the growth of the Westchester Airport, development, traffic, and safety in our area. Tonight, we'll have our annual Candidates Forum. We will first meet our candidates for Connecticut's 149th House of Representatives District, incumbent Rachel Khanna and her Republican challenger, Tina Corpus. This will be followed by the debate between the candidates for Connecticut's 36th State Senate District, incumbent Republican Ryan Fazio and his Democratic challenger, Nick Simmons. Connecticut has a bicameral legislature, the Connecticut General Assembly, which consists of the House of Representatives and the Senate. The main difference between the state senators and representatives is the number of districts they represent and the responsibilities that they have. Senators in Connecticut represent over 100,000 constituents in 36 districts. Representatives represent 25,000 constituents in 151 districts. Both senators and state representatives serve two-year terms, and there are no term limits for members of the Connecticut General Assembly. State representatives serve more localized, smaller districts, which allows them to focus on very specific community issues, while state senators represent broader areas with larger constituencies, which means they often need to address more regional or statewide issues. Our questions tonight consider these distinctions. The evening will be broken down into two 45-minute segments, one for each set of candidates. We'll have a quick break in between. We've asked the candidates to please stay afterwards for a few minutes at the end of our forum if residents wish to pose additional questions that were not asked or dig deeper into any issues that were raised this evening. We hope to stick around. Questions have been submitted from our membership and vetted by a representative of both Democratic and Republican parties. For each question, we will alternate who goes first. Each candidate will have 2.5 minutes to introduce themselves. Candidates will then have 1.5 minutes to answer each question. There will be no rebuttal, and there will be no questions from the audience. Before the event started, we flipped a coin, and Tina has chosen to go first. So without further ado, I'll introduce the candidates for Connecticut's 149th House of Representatives, which serves Western and Northern Greenwich, as well as North Stamford. Welcome Rachel Khanna and Tina Corpus.
Thank you. Thank you to the Round Hill Association for hosting us here tonight. It's nice to see so many familiar faces. I'm Tina Corpus. I'm running to be your state representative. I am the daughter of Greek immigrants who came to this country with nothing but an education and lived the American dream. I earned my undergraduate degree from Princeton University and law degree from Columbia Law School. I then worked as a corporate lawyer and investment banker for over 2 decades. I then ran a bipartisan nonprofit organization which advocated for the rights of Connecticut's women and girls in Connecticut. I'm running because I'm concerned about the direction our state is heading, and we need to change course now. Here are the things I'm most concerned about. The supermajority. I don't know how many people in this room are aware of this, but Connecticut is 3 seats from a Democrat supermajority in our legislature. This will mean that one party will control the state government. One party rule has no diversity of opinion no robust debate, and no incentive to compromise, regardless of which party is in charge. Supermajority means that even a moderate governor like Ned Lamont would have no veto power over extreme legislation. I'm concerned about crime. Car thefts were up 33% statewide in 2023. This is largely the result of policies which do not allow the police to do their jobs. I'm concerned about local control of zoning. State government is permitting developers to build high-rises without any input from our community and without any say on the impact on our community. And finally, I'm concerned about Connecticut's finances. We have the second highest state and local tax burden and second highest electricity costs in the United States. My opponent's voting record has taken us farther in each of these troubling directions, as I will point out this evening. We do not have the leadership we need in the 149th district. We do not have the balance we need in Connecticut's government today. This election is about restoring that balance.
Thank you. Rachel.
Thank you to the Round Hill Association for organizing this forum. Thank you, Brendan, for moderating it, and thank you all for joining us this evening. I'm Rachel Khanna. I'm the incumbent state representative for the 149th district. I'm a longtime Greenwich resident, and I've raised our 4 daughters here, 2 of which are here tonight, as well as 3 dogs and 2 cats. If I had to pick the 2 most central priorities in this election, I'd say they are our wallets and our freedoms. But first, I want to correct the record on local control. There's no disagreement between my opponent and myself on that issue. I'm steadfast in protecting local control over zoning decisions, which is why I was endorsed by the Connecticut Realtors. But on the other 2 priorities, first, our wallet. There's what we pay in taxes, what we get back from the state, and how responsible we are with the budget. First, I'm proud to say that we just delivered the largest income tax cut in Connecticut's history. Second, in the last 2 years, we've brought back almost $100 million, probably more money than ever before, for Greenwich and Stamford, for the Glendale Corridor Traffic Improvement Project, for Central Middle and Roxbury Elementary Schools, for nonprofits like the Avon Theater, River House, Parsonage Cottage, and Greenwich Library. And third, we stayed 100% within our fiscal guardrails. We've created a balanced budget, and we've paid off $8 billion of our pension debt, which will save taxpayers nearly $700 million per year. And our rainy day fund is fully funded as well. Finally, I've earned a 100% rating from the Connecticut Business and Industry Association, who have seen my work implementing business-friendly policies. Second, on our freedoms and values, the organizations that have endorsed me speak to what my values are. I've been endorsed by both the Connecticut and Stamford Union of Professional Firefighters. I've been endorsed by Connecticut Against Gun Violence and Moms Demand Action because I've been a tireless and effective fighter for gun violence prevention. I've been endorsed by the League of Conservation Voters and Sierra Club for my leadership in protecting Connecticut's environment. And in terms of our most endangered right, the right to control our own bodies, I've been endorsed by both Planned Parenthood, where I was a volunteer escort, and Reproductive Equity Now, because I don't just say that I support women's reproductive rights, I actually vote for them. I'm endorsed by both the Democratic and Independent parties because of my record of working across the aisle. And I'm going to be happy to tell you more during our question and answer session. Thank you.
Thank you. First question will be posed to Rachel. It regards electricity costs. Electricity bills have risen significantly since this summer, in part due to a new portion of our bill going towards a quote-unquote public benefit. Can you clarify for us what the public benefit portion of this bill is, and do you support it? What steps would you take to address high energy costs for residents? And what are your long-term solutions to make energy more affordable, including renewables? Rachel.
Thank you. Yes, indeed. The electricity bills that we received this summer were a shock to us all. They affected residents, small businesses, all of us. It's very hard to plan a budget around these unexpected increases. The reasons for the increases have been well reported, as you mentioned, the public benefits, which is something that was pulled out of our bill as a result of legislation that we passed in 2023. My opponent has urged us to have a special session. That's a gimmick, because we need to find broad and sustainable solutions, more than what can be done in a one-day special session. There are 3 ideas that I support. I and my colleagues on the Moderate Caucus wrote a letter to the PURA commissioners to ask them to reconsider making ratepayers make the payments over 22 months versus the 10, and they refused. There are currently 2 empty seats on the board of PURA, and we need to make sure that we appoint commissioners who are pro-consumer, not pro-Eversource. We need to look at possibly removing the public benefits portion from our electricity bill and making it part of the general fund, so it stops being a hidden regressive tax. And we need to explore other energy sources so that our residents don't rely so much on Eversource. But I also want to note that many policies that control electricity costs are coming into effect now. The Take Back Our Grid Act that the legislature voted on in 2020 and Senate Bill 7 that we voted on in 2023 all contained reforms to increase predictability and transparency for ratepayers.
Thanks, Rachel. If you guys could put your microphones closer so we can hear you. Tina, you're up.
My opponent purports to be an advocate for ratepayers in our community, but when it comes down to acting, she stays silent or doesn't act. The public benefits portion of my bill rose from 6% in April to 29% in July, the same thing that we all saw. $200 million of that came from the COVID moratorium. This was a policy enacted during COVID to give relief to those people whose incomes were suffering, and I believe the relief was appropriate, so that if they didn't pay their electric bill, their electricity would not be turned off. 24 states in the United States had such a COVID moratorium. Connecticut's moratorium lasted for 4 years, the longest in the United States. The $200 million of unpaid bills that racked up are what you saw on your electric bill starting in July. The legislature had an opportunity to deploy COVID relief funds to that $200 million. In fact, Republicans advocated for that in February. That didn't happen. My opponent instead voted for a stabilization bill, which put those funds elsewhere. Then there was another opportunity to correct that mistake and call a special session. My opponent stayed silent and until today has not signed the petition to call a special session. Finally, with respect to our long-term energy policy, yes, Connecticut needs more clean, safe, and affordable sources of energy.
Thank you. Next question is for Tina. Affordable housing, zoning, and local control. Statute 830G seeks to encourage the development of more affordable housing units by allowing developers to disregard local zoning rules and new developments. Though it has been around for decades, it has recently become more popular given the convergence of record housing prices and historically low interest rates. It is unlikely to be overturned or amended. We continue to see large-scale developments proposed and built across town. How do you propose working within the confines of 830G in a way that our town can actually handle? Are there creative ways? What can you do, if anything, to ensure we maintain some sort of local control? And then how do you balance the need for affordable housing while preserving local authority?
My opponent in her opening remarks referred to herself as a supporter of local control of zoning, yet the most significant bill in her 2-year tenure, Live, Work, Ride, was a bill she voted for, which eroded local control. It allowed as-of-right development near train and bus stations throughout the state of Connecticut on an opt-in basis, deferring hundreds of millions of dollars away from towns that do not opt in. The bill had environmental problems. It would have impacted those areas of towns that are closest to the water, and my opponent voted for it. 8 Democrats crossed party lines to vote against the bill. With respect to solutions, 830G has been an ineffective bill. I would propose that we endeavor to overhaul it. If not, at least let's give credit where credit is due. Greenwich has types of affordable housing that are not included. Accessory dwelling units, housing from private schools, hospitals, and country clubs, which are affordable but are not counted. But most of all, there are incentives we can use at the town and local level to incentivize developers or require developers to have a certain percentage of the housing they erect as affordable, and that can be done at the local level.
Thank you.
Thank you. to Greenwich 24 years ago. Greenwich is our home. I love the feel of this community, and I don't want the state telling us where and how to build housing. As I said before, I remain steadfast in my commitment to protecting local control. In 2023, there was a bill called Fair Share Bill, where each community would have to build the number of units mandated by the state. I broke with my party to vote against that bill. In 2024, the transit-oriented or work-live ride bill was moving through the House and was going to pass. My colleagues in the House, Representatives Steve Meskers and Hector Arzeno, intervened and engaged Margarita Alban, our Commissioner of Planning and Zoning, and Francis Pickering, the Director of the Western Connecticut Council of Governments, to help us craft language to help protect control of zoning. Another bill, House Bill 5474, which I voted for, would allow us to get more points toward our 830G moratorium. So when my opponent accuses me of violating my promise, I respectfully respond that I did the exact opposite by protecting Greenwich's right to decide whether and where moderate income housing is built. There's no arguing that we need more housing to grow our economy. By some estimates, the state needs about 90,000 units, but this needs to be driven by us because local leaders know best about the town's needs on density and infrastructure. And this is why I received the endorsement of the Connecticut Realtors.
Thank you, Rachel. Next question is for Rachel. Water quality. In September of 2023, Parkway School was forced to use bottled water because high levels of toxic contaminants, known as PFAS, were found in the drinking water. Like most backcountry residents, Parkway School relies on well water as opposed to town water. What measures would you support to ensure that we have safe and clean water in backcountry, where most of our residents rely on well water?
Yes, thank you. I was very disturbed when I read about the water quality at Parkway School. My kids went to Parkway School, so it's the place of which I feel very close to. There were a lot of bills that we passed in the House to begin addressing PFAS in our water and other chemicals, and we certainly need to do more on that front to really get to the bottom of that.
Thank you. Tina.
I am committed to addressing issues in the environment and making sure the district has short and long-term plans which address these risks. Water in our schools is fundamental. I do support legislation which restricts PFAS. I would support legislation which would make sure that our drinking water is safe.
Thank you. For those of you who don't know, you could have your well water tested for the town of Greenwich, including PFAS. Moving on to public safety and crime prevention. This is for Tina. With growing concerns about crime in the area, for example, car thefts in backcountry, robberies on Greenwich Avenue, what specific strategies would you implement to ensure public safety and reduce crime in Greenwich and throughout Connecticut?
Public safety is a matter of balancing the need for punishment and the need for mercy, so to speak, especially when juveniles are involved. The Police Accountability Bill of 2020 rolled back a number of common sense tools that the police had used before to stop criminals, to take illegal guns off the streets, to use proactive policing to prevent crimes rather than just deal with crimes after they were committed. My opponent has taken a number of votes against putting some of those reasonable policing practices back. I've been endorsed by the Fraternal Order of Police, the Police Association of Connecticut, and the Stamford Police Association for my stand on this issue. For example, there was an amendment in the House which provided that consent searches would be reestablished in Connecticut. This allows a police officer to pull someone over when they have a reasonable suspicion that illegal guns and drugs are in a car, and with that person's consent, search the car. This is the #1 tool that police officers have to take illegal guns and drugs off the street. My opponent voted against it. Another area of public safety about which I have concern is driving while intoxicated or driving while high. There was an amendment on the floor this year that my opponent voted against, and the amendment provided that police officers could pull someone over who they saw visibly smoking cannabis while operating a car. My opponent voted against allowing police to do so. I would have voted for it.
Thank you. Rachel?
Thank you, yes. I'd like to correct the record before I provide my answer. According to the Connecticut Department of Transportation, which one can check on their website, current law already allows police to pull over someone who is under the influence of cannabis or is visibly impaired. I'm just going to read it very briefly. It's essential to remember that operating a motor vehicle under the influence of cannabis is illegal and carries with it the same penalties as driving under the influence of alcohol or any other drug. A police officer can test an operator based on the odor of cannabis if, at the time, they reasonably suspect the operator is under the influence of the same. But I agree that no one should feel unsafe, and no one should worry about being the victim of a crime. Connecticut ranks among the safest states in the nation. As a matter of fact, the Greenwich Time and Stanford Advocate recently published an article that crime in Connecticut is down. Violent crime rates are 40% of the US average, and they've declined by 41% since Connecticut enacted its sweeping gun safety laws in the wake of the tragedy at Sandy Hook. I voted for funding for body cams so police can have the resources they need. I voted in favor of stronger gun violence prevention laws, and I voted in favor of a bill for families of firefighters and police officers who die in the line of duty to be eligible to receive benefits. Here in Greenwich, the #1 crime is domestic violence, and I voted in favor of a bill to provide greater protections for individuals involved in domestic violence, and I will continue to support victims.
Thank you. Next question is for Rachel. It's regarding flooding and climate resilience. Given recent incidents of flooding and extreme weather, what actions would you take to improve infrastructure and protect Greenwich shoreline, rivers and streams from future environmental impacts? Rachel, would you?
Climate change is the defining challenge of our era. The last several years have been the 4 hottest on record, and the Northeast is warming faster than most other parts of the country. This affects every aspect of our lives, our health, our food systems, our infrastructure. We saw over the summer how badly intense flooding affected parts of our state. And as a coastal community, a coastal state, we're particularly vulnerable. There were 2 important environmental bills in this session, and I'm disappointed that they didn't pass, House Bill 5004 and Senate Bill 11. I did receive the endorsement of the Sierra Club and the Connecticut League of Conservation Voters for my efforts to protect the environment. But we know that there's more to do to protect our infrastructure and the residents who live on our shorelines.
Thank you. It's really important that you guys speak right into the microphone. I kind of had a hard time hearing in the back. Tina.
I would like to correct the record on a prior question, because I spoke about this with the Stanford police last week. If you were driving down the Merritt Parkway drinking a can of beer and you were pulled over, that is a misdemeanor. If you are smoking marijuana driving down the Merritt in a car while driving, that is currently not a misdemeanor. That was the vote against which my opponent voted. If you were found to be drunk, then you're obviously get a DUI. And if you were found ultimately to be high, that also is against the law. But it was the driving with a joint that was the issue of the vote that my opponent took. With respect to the environment and flooding, obviously we've had significant issues about this topic in our community. I am a proponent of the environmental laws of this state. I believe that the bills number 504 and number 11 in last year's legislative session were bills I would have supported. I believe we need a comprehensive flood plan at a local and state level for this state.
Thank you. Next question starts with Tina, and again, please speak into the microphone. Regarding public transportation and traffic. Traffic congestion and safety is a persistent issue throughout Greenwich. In backcountry, we see cars driving well over the speed limits on roads that were not designed for such a high volume of cars. There are dozens of documented accidents, some with injuries. What policies or infrastructure improvements would you prioritize to alleviate traffic congestion all across town and make our roads safer for pedestrians and bicyclists? Tina, that's for you.
We need to make sure that we're investing in infrastructure projects which have the highest value and deliver the most good for the most people. We spend a disproportionate amount of the money to Hartford, and we get very little in return on those dollars. Our infrastructure has been underfunded. Metro North has gotten slower, the Merritt Parkway can be a nightmare, and we have to make sure that the projects we are embarking on are maximizing value. Two changes I would make are that when the Department of Transportation awards a project, it has the option of whether to award it under a project labor agreement or not. Project labor agreements are the reason why infrastructure costs in the Northeast are higher than they are in other parts of the country and world. We need to free up the Department of Transportation to not engage in those contracts. And we need to fund our infrastructure without an additional tax on taxpayers. That means no tolls, and that means a stopping of taxes like the truck tax.
Rachel.
I run and bike on these roads, so I understand the concerns. I've successfully partnered with the Connecticut Department of Transportation and the Greenwich Department of Public Works to bring money home for key pedestrian and traffic safety projects. The first being $6.5 million for the Glenville Corridor Traffic Improvement Project, which was stalled for many years. And recently we received an almost $800,000 community connectivity grant for pedestrian and traffic improvements near Railroad Avenue. I plan to do more of that because there's much more work to be done. I've also voted in favor of adopting the recommendations of the Vision Zero Council to allow municipalities to adopt speed and red light cameras and to address wrong-way driving. Because I agree that currently driving on our roads is very dangerous, and as a matter of fact, in 2023, there were almost 1,500 crashes involving pedestrians and cyclists. 180 of them were serious injuries, and 64 of them were deaths. So there is more that we need to look at, and I'm committed to doing that.
Great, thank you. Next question, this is for Rachel. School funding. How would you ensure that our local schools are adequately funded to allow for upkeep and maintenance? How will you make sure available resources are used effectively to maintain high-quality education in Greenwich?
Public schools are the backbone of our community, the biggest reason that people want to live here. I'm so proud that we have great schools. According to Wallet Hub, Connecticut schools are the second best in the country. I've been a public school parent, and I know this for sure. So I'm a big supporter of our public schools, and will continue to work hard at the state to make sure that they're properly funded, that their facilities are modern, and that we can retain and recruit the best educators so that our kids can learn and thrive. In 2023, we made historic investments in K-12 education, the second biggest in state history at $240 million. I worked with the Greenwich and Stamford delegations to bring back funds for the reconstruction of Roxbury Elementary School and Central Middle School. And I just want to add that for someone for whom nutrition is important and something that is near and dear to my heart is free school meals. I've been a big proponent and advocate of free lunches for all, which I believe is very important for our children. We need to make sure that our children have all the tools that they need to succeed, from tablets to proper nutrition. We need to remove the stigma around not being able to pay for a school meal for whatever reason it may be. And my work supporting schools, supporting funding for education, supporting teachers has earned me an A- from the Connecticut Education Association.
Thank you, Rachel. Tina.
Connecticut schools are excellent, but they could be improved, particularly what we invest per child in the state. Stanford Public Schools, for example, invest $20,000 per student and achieve only a 54% proficiency at the 4th grade level. Yet the Stanford Charter School for Excellence just down the road spends half of that per student and achieves an 82.5% reading proficiency level. We should improve the feedback loops and focus on the procedures and the processes and tactics that are working at schools that work. In the last budget session, $4.5 billion of COVID relief money was allocated to various priorities around the state. $700 million of that went to fund higher education in the state. Various schools like the University of Connecticut and the community colleges of Connecticut, which are worthy institutions, but received an outsized amount of this federal funding, even in the face of declining enrollments and budgetary gaps. A lot of that money could have been allocated to our K-12 schools. In fact, Tammy Nunzio, a ranking member of the Appropriations Committee, said the disparity between how much we funded higher ed versus how much we funded primary and secondary education this year was a smack in the face to anyone who is a friend of education. I believe we need to focus on our K through 12 schools so that they have the funding they need, the supplies they need to equip our children for tomorrow.
Thank you, Tina. Next question is for Tina. Regarding bipartisanship, with Greenwich being politically diverse, how would you work to represent all residents and foster bipartisan collaboration in the state legislature? Further, given the needs and issues of the rest of the state sometimes differ greatly than ours, can you explain how you would fend for us in Hartford?
I am a Republican who is pro-choice, who is supportive of the environment, and who worked in a women's organization. I ran the Bipartisan Women's Commission of Connecticut for 3 years. That organization had a 50-year legacy of advocating for Connecticut's women and girls. As a Republican, as you might expect, I was the minority in that framework. But I managed to build coalitions across the state. We had the largest single piece of research ever on the impact of COVID-19 on Connecticut's women, including a survey of over 1,000 women at Zoom forums across the state. I have experience building coalitions in Hartford and in the private sector. This district is 40% unaffiliated, 30% Republican, and 30% Democrat. That means we have approximately 7,000 unaffiliated voters. I would like to make a point here. There is a difference between an unaffiliated voter and an independent voter. We have 252 independents registered in the district. The Independent Party is a political platform. It supports ranked choice voting and other things that I personally do not support. So when my opponent says that she has the endorsement of the Independent Party as a proxy for being bipartisan, I respectfully disagree. My opponent voted 98% of the time with her party in Hartford.
Rachel.
Thank you. 98% of the bills that we pass in the House are passed with bipartisan support. As my opponent mentioned, I was endorsed by the Independent Party, which shows that I do work across the aisle to come to a consensus. And I have experience doing this when I served on the RTM for 4 years. I know what it's like to work with colleagues from within my party, but also colleagues from outside my party. And I'm proud to have worked and co-sponsored legislation from all sides in the House, and I will continue to do that. And I've spent much of my time in between the session listening on a listening tour, going around the district, listening to my constituents. I make myself available for coffees and legislative updates at the beginning and end of the session, so I'm always open to listening to all my constituents, regardless of party.
Thank you. Coming towards the last question for this segment, regarding a mansion tax. A recent report suggests that Connecticut could raise a so-called mansion tax to pay for homeless shelters, housing, and other social needs. The report from the Center for Budget and Policy Priorities and the Institute on Taxation and Economic Policy estimates that Connecticut could generate tens, if not hundreds of millions of dollars by increasing taxes on the sale of homes that sell for $1 million or more. Would you support a mansion tax, and why? Are there other ways to generate funding for social needs? This one is for Rachel.
I do not support a mansion tax, and I'm very proud that we were able to pass the largest income tax cut in Connecticut's history in 2023. Greenwich and Stamford and Southwestern Connecticut overall contribute mightily to the state. That's why I'm proud to say that I've delivered state funding and resources for our community, and I've worked hard to do that with my colleagues. Like I said, in 2023, we had the largest tax cut in Connecticut's history, and we also expanded tax exemptions for pension income. Having a seat at the table with the majority helped us secure money for our district, for the Glendale Corridor Project, for the Boys and Girls Club of Greenwich, for so many of our nonprofits, Greenwich Library, and so many other organizations. We know that we need to do more, and we're already working to do that.
Tina.
Connecticut's policies have driven out its highest income residents. I don't need to give that news here in the backcountry. The voters I speak to are fully prepared to pay more than their share because they are at higher income levels. They've bought off on a progressive tax system, but our state has taken this to the extreme. In 2020, Connecticut had 1.7 million tax return filers. The top 20,000 of those filers paid, or 1% of the people, paid 40% of the income taxes of this state. I oppose a statewide property tax, in particular at home levels of $1 million above, which is not a mansion in our district, for these very same reasons. One point I would like to make: the response and recovery effort of COVID-19 was the largest relief assistance program in American history. The federal government pumped $4.5 billion in COVID relief money into the Connecticut state legislature in 2020 and 2021. Those monies had to be deployed by 2024. So my opponent's 2 years in the Connecticut legislature coincided with the largest federal slush fund in American history, which slush fund had to be deployed during her tenure also. Income tax revenues account for 10% of the total revenues of the total income revenues of the state. During Ms. Khanna's tenure, we sent up $4.8 billion in income tax revenues. A recent flyer of hers said that she brought back $34 million. Put another way, for every dollar we sent to Hartford during her term, she brought back 1 penny.
Thank you, Tina. We'll now go towards our closing statements, in which we have 3 minutes per candidate. We've moved pretty quickly, so we can probably push that another 30 seconds if you don't mind, an extra 30 seconds each. We've agreed that Rachel will close out, so you have 3 minutes and 30 seconds for your closing statements.
Thank you all
And
again.
please speak right into the microphone.
Oh, sorry. Thank you all again for joining us this evening. I hope I've made clear my commitment to this district and to you, the people I'm honored to serve as your state representative. When I ran in 2022, I promised fiscal responsibility without sacrificing our values, and I've delivered. We balanced the state budget, paid down pension debt, saving taxpayers $700 million a year, and filled the rainy day fund to its maximum. As a result, the 3 major credit rating agencies upgraded Connecticut's debt rating. I've brought back close to $100 million to Stamford and Greenwich in funding for new school construction, road and pedestrian safety improvement projects, and to support the vital work of our community's nonprofits who serve our older adults and our children. And I've consistently voted to protect our values and rights, including keeping our communities safe and ensuring that women can make reproductive health care decisions for themselves. Through persistence, hard work, and a willingness to reach across the aisle, I've been able to achieve this success and more on your behalf. I'm proud that 98% of the bills that we passed in the past 2 years were passed with bipartisan support. The endorsements that I've earned from leading organizations here and across the state, including Connecticut Against Gun Violence, Connecticut Realtors, Planned Parenthood, the Stamford Professional Firefighters, and the 100% rating I've earned from the Connecticut Business and Industry Association, recognize my work and reputation for being a leader who keeps her promises. I'm proud of my accomplishments, and I'm honored to represent you. I hope I've again earned your confidence, your trust, and your vote in this election. Thank you.
And Tina, 3 minutes and 30 seconds.
Thank you to the Round Hill Association for hosting this event, and thank you to my opponent for this dialogue. This is an election of vision and ideas. My opponent is not my enemy, but we need a change of leadership in the 149th district. My opponent says one thing to you on the campaign trail and then votes a different way in Hartford, bowing to the political pressure of the majority party over the interests of the district she serves. But the votes are the votes. My opponent says she is for public safety, yet she repeatedly voted to prevent the police from using reasonable common sense practices, even as car thefts were up 33% in 2023. My opponent says she stands for local control of zoning, yet she voted to erode local control on the single most significant bill of her term, Live, Work, Ride, and that bill will be back next year. My opponent says she has helped put Connecticut's fiscal house in order, yet this year she voted to use $700 million in one-time federal funds to prop up operating expenses in the budget, setting the state up for a $1 billion hole in the coming fiscal year and tax increases for us all. My opponent claims to be a moderate, yet she voted to advance some of the most extreme ideas of her party in Hartford, such as mandatory voting for all citizens and a fine if citizens don't vote. My opponent claims to represent us all, yet she voted with her party 98% of the time. I'm not talking about when a single Republican or Democrat voted with or against their party. I'm talking with the majority of her party. And here is what her party has proposed for us for the coming year: statewide property tax, mansion tax, and surcharge on capital gains. But this election is about more than who we elect for the 149th. It is about deciding whether Connecticut will in fact become a one-party state. If Connecticut flips to a Democrat supermajority in the legislature, it will mean that even a moderate governor like Lamont, who is a constituent of this district, will not be able to veto any extreme legislation posed. A 2/3 supermajority will simply override his veto, and the final check and balance in Connecticut government will be gone. I have over 20 years of robust legal and financial experience and will be a strong advocate for this district in Hartford, not constrained by the political pressure to bow to the controlling party. I have a proven track record of working with both sides of the aisle to get things done at the Capitol. It would be my honor to serve you, and I promise I will not let you down. Connecticut needs a course correction, and it needs it now. Let's restore reasonable balance to our state government. I am humbly asking for your vote on November 5th. Thank you.
I'd like to introduce our candidates for State Senate, which represents Greenwich, as well as parts of Stamford and New Canaan. Welcome Ryan Fazio and Nick Simmons. We'll start with opening statements, and then we'll go through the questions. Ryan won the coin toss, so he'll open up. Ryan, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you to the Round Hill Association for hosting us, and thank you all for being here. The fact that it's standing room only for a state legislative debate is a sign that this district, that this town is engaged in its local and state politics, which is exactly why we need to protect things like local control of decision making, because you know better than Hartford. I have had the honor of representing my hometown in the state senate for the last 3 years, and that responsibility has been the honor of a lifetime. 2 years ago when I ran for re-election, I did so on the promise of bringing people together across the aisle in order to protect this district and improve the future of our state. And sitting before you today, I can report to you that that promise was delivered upon. I co-authored and passed some of the strongest utilities oversight reforms in the country in order to protect consumers from the utilities, including Eversource in our state, the aforementioned SB 7. I co-authored and passed a historic expansion of birth control access for women in the state and support keeping abortion legal in the state of Connecticut. I co-sponsored and passed a strengthening and an expansion of background checks for firearms purchases, and I co-authored and passed one of the first victories for local control of planning and zoning in our state in a decade, returning the rights of decision-making back to our town where it belongs. But as difficult as those things, as difficult as those things were, I had to work just as hard to stop bad legislation, like Work, Live, Ride, House Bill 5390, which would have threatened to take away millions of dollars from towns and cities like Greenwich and Stamford if they did not adopt as-of-right zoning in certain neighborhoods all around the town. I threatened to filibuster in the closing week and killed that bill. But all this will be back. We have a 65% Democratic majority in the state legislature, and if I lose and other Republicans lose, just just a couple more, there'll be a strong supermajority of one party in order to pass whatever the leadership wants, including a statewide property tax and the elimination of local planning and zoning rights. I don't even agree with myself 70% of the time, so why should we expect the state government to be able to make wise decisions if it has 70% supermajorities? I believe in balance, I believe in bipartisanship, I believe in common sense. So in this discussion, hopefully we can look into some of those topics that matter to our town and ensure that we have balance in the state government going forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Ryan. Okay, Tuna.
Thank you, Brendan, and to the association for having us tonight. The Round Hill Association is very near and dear to my heart. I actually went to the Round Hill Nursery School just across the parking lot. I learned how to foxtrot about right there on the floor at the Barclays dance class. Pretty awkward at 12. But so it's great to be here, and thank you. So I think as many of you know, I was born and raised here in Greenwich with my 4 siblings. And it's such an incredible, amazing place to grow up. So a little bit about me. First, I've tried to devote my career to public service. I've been a 7th grade math teacher and acting principal of a middle school in Harlem, New York. I've been Deputy Chief of Staff to Governor Ned Lamont in Hartford, where I helped oversee the investment of hundreds of millions of dollars in our public schools, into workforce development programs, in growing the economy. Second, I'm a moderate. I'm the first Democrat for this seat to ever get the endorsement of the Independent Party, something I'm very, very proud of. But I think most importantly, I'm a father and a husband. My wife Rachel and I are back here, and we're so excited that we just had our first baby this year, and we're so excited to be raising him right here back at home. I'm running for the state senate because I want for my children and for all of our children to have as great an experience growing up here as it was for me and my 4 siblings. But I think to do that and to ensure that, we have to do several things. First, we have to cut taxes and make it more affordable to live here. Taxes have gone up on a percentage basis of income since I was born. I think we need to in Hartford, we can cut the estate tax, the gift tax, and provide property relief, as well as lowering our electric bills. We need to get more money from Hartford to invest in badly neglected infrastructure. We have schools falling down. We have the most congested highway in America on I-95, highest percentage of commuters taking Metro North. It's been neglected. Our leaders haven't done enough to bring back money. Third, we have to get back to the values that would make this town so great. Things like standing up for a woman's right to choose. My opponent says he stands for that. He voted against one of the best pro-choice bills in a generation. Things like gun safety. We passed one of the most comprehensive gun safety bills in the country. My opponent voted against the bill. He took part in a filibuster to kill that bill. That's not the Greenwich that I knew, that I grew up in. That's why we have more unaffiliated voters than ever. We have to get back to the middle and stand up for the things that we care about.
Thank you. First question is for Nick, with a similar question from the previous debate about bipartisanship. With Greenwich being so politically diverse, how would you work to represent all of our residents and foster bipartisan collaboration in the state legislature? Further, given the needs and issues of the rest of the state differ greatly from ours, can you explain how you would best fund for us in Hartford?
Bipartisanship is what makes this town great. I grew up here, a moderate Republican. I worshipped George Herbert Walker Bush. I even interned for Congressman Chris Shays growing up here. I think one of the things we need to do, and that people are aching for in our town, that I hear at the doors all the time, is we have to stop with the extremism on both sides. I never thought that MAGA would come to Greenwich. I never thought I would see the Republicans across our town, or our current state senator, not just firmly stand up against someone like Donald Trump. Republicans have been doing it all over the country. Chris Shays has stood out against Donald Trump. Mitt Romney, Paul Ryan, Mike Pence. I don't understand why is it so hard to stand up and say that I condemn this kind of extremism that's been taking over the party. In terms of bipartisanship, my opponent and I, we both went to the Independent Party. We laid out our records, we laid out our beliefs, our philosophies, and we said we are the bipartisan candidate in this election. We're the practical problem solvers. The Independent Party voted 13-2 to endorse me over Ryan based on his voting record. So I think reaching across the aisle is exactly what I want to do. It is a staple of Governor Ned Lamont, who I was happy to work for 3 years. And we talk about balance in the state Senate. The difference between 13 Republican state senators and 12 state senators isn't going to make a difference, I can tell you. But having a moderate in the majority who's going to be bipartisan, that's going to make a difference.
Thank you. Ryan, the same question to you.
It's easy to say a lot of things during a campaign, but an action and leadership and a record is actually what differentiates people. I co-authored, introduced, and passed into law 6 major new laws in the state of Connecticut just in the last 2 years. That is highly unusual even for a senior senator in the majority to do, but I did it as a 3rd and 2nd year senator in the minority. Those were not insignificant. Those were to expand birth control access for women. Those were to return local control of decision making for the first time in some fashion to our towns and cities. And it was to actually improve our regulatory oversight to protect consumers from utilities. I have walked the walk, not just talked the talk. And I always find it funny when I hear or see my opponent accusing me of being dangerous or whatnot. When my opponent called me before he chose to run for this seat, he said that we're going to run a positive campaign on the issues. But now he's spending most of his time and money attacking me and accusing me of being things that I'm not. He told the first selectman in a private conversation that he thinks I'm great, we should run for governor. He told our Board of Education member, Cody Kittle, the same thing, separately, that I should run for governor. I very much in private appreciate your endorsement for governor. I have no desire to run for it. I do have a desire to keep doing the job of reaching across the aisle to protect our district as your state senator for the next 2 years.
For Ryan to start, again, about energy costs. Electricity bills have risen significantly since the summer, in part due to the new portion of our bill going towards a public benefit. Can you clarify what the public benefit portion of the bill is, and do you support it? What initiatives would you propose to promote energy efficiency, renewable energy use, alternative technologies, and long-term sustainability for Greenwich residents? Ryan.
Well, thank you for that question. Everybody in our state knows electric bills are too damn high. They're the 3rd highest in the country after Hawaii, which is an island, and after California, which has lost its mind. And state policies bear responsibility for those inflated costs. First and foremost, the public benefits charges embedded in our electric bill, which equate to a hidden tax funding roughly 40 different government programs, adding up to about $500 or $700 million a year that should normally go through the budgetary process and be voted upon every 2 years and compete against other sources of government funding. I co-authored the plan 2 years ago to remove those public benefits from our electric bills. I co-authored the 6-point plan that has now been signed on by 64 other legislators, the most widely supported energy proposal to cut energy costs in the entire state of Connecticut, and have been trying to, shall we say, build support for it across the aisle as well. And I'm also appreciative of the endorsement of parts of my energy plan from my opponent. You can go to my Twitter account where I just retweeted the analysis showing that he copy and pasted 2 of the sections of my energy proposal. I am very appreciative of your support, Nick, for my energy proposal. I do not require the correct citation. I just want to see good ideas gain support and finally reduce energy costs on the public in this state.
Thank you.
Oof, okay, there was a lot there. So first, let's go back to the negative campaign. I did absolutely want to do that. But I think accountability matters as well, which is why I was shocked, and a lot of people were shocked at, frankly, jaws on the floor, when they saw a mailer go out from my opponent, 2 mailers, said, "I am the bipartisan leader in Hartford on gun safety control, and I am your bipartisan leader on women's right to choose." Even though my opponent voted against the most comprehensive and historic gun safety bill maybe in the history of the state, and the bill to defend reproductive rights, to defend women from being prosecuted for abortions, who get abortions in our state. who wrote in 2018, Roe v. Wade is offensive to the rule of law. I think that I was ready to run a positive campaign, but not one that doesn't call out or hold accountable just blatant lies. And I wish you would just stand by it if that's what you believe, because the evidence is wrapped up. On electricity, on plagiarism, well, Brian, it's called public policy for a reason, right? Those are the ideas that you recommended and put forth are very, very common ideas that have been put forth by energy experts for decades. The all of the above strategy was Barack Obama's 2012 presidential campaign energy strategy. So I don't think you have a monopoly on these pretty basic ideas. And I'm glad that we agree on a lot of them because they are going to bring down our electric rates, more competition, not overpaying market rate, making the grid more sustainable, more reliable.
Thank you.
No problem. A lot there.
Next question starts with Nick. It's regarding election integrity. In Connecticut, voters this year have a question about election laws on our ballot this year. We will be asked if the state legislature should be allowed to amend voting laws to allow for no excuse absentee voting. Connecticut is one of about a dozen states that require an excuse, like illness or military deployment, to use an absentee ballot. Additionally, for the first time this year, we can vote early. Do you support these initiatives? And do you see any issues with election integrity in Greenwich or the state?
I absolutely support the amendment. As a state, we've been pretty much in the dark ages on access to being able to vote. We rank 47th, 48th among all 50 states on just basic things like being able to vote early and being able to vote by mail. Republican and blue states all across the country have been doing this for decades, and it just makes common sense. These are measures which are going to kick in about 13 days. You can go vote at town hall on a Saturday, on a Friday, on a Monday. If you have plans on election day, this just makes it much, much easier to be able to do. Mail-in ballots were something that was originally kicked off by Ruby Red, Arizona, I think in the 90s. Everybody gets a ballot, they've been voting properly, they've been run by Republicans, now run by Democrats. So I absolutely support the amendment, and I think it'll be great for the state.
Thank you.
And just to return to a couple of the previous issues, Nick, we were on stage. We were on stage with Senator Patricia Billy Miller last week at a debate where you could have brought up, because it was the first debate you and I had been a part of, you could have brought up that vote against the abortion-related bill 2 years ago. But you didn't, and you didn't because she and 16 other Democrats in the state legislature also voted against it because, like me, they were concerned that by expanding scope of practice to the point that midwives and nurses would be able to perform surgical abortions without the consultation of a doctor, that it would actually undermine health for patients. That's why I voted against that bill. She did too, but it's very, very suspicious. You wouldn't mention that when she was on the same stage as us, but you do it tonight. Because this is not about informing the public. This is about winning an election. There is a lot more we need to do in order to protect election security in the state. We had so much negative attention as a state after the scandals in Bridgeport, and it wasn't the first time that that happened. It's shameful. And I've co-introduced with Republican colleagues 5 different proposals to ensure that there is a requirement for voter identification, that there is a requirement for signature verification on absentee ballots. I actually crossed party lines to vote for the implementation of early in-person voting this year. But making absentee balloting no excuse instead of any excuse will only encourage more of the malfeasance in places like Bridgeport.
Thank you. Next question will be start with Ryan regarding environmental protection. What actions would you take to reduce ozone pollution and improve air quality in Fairfield County, which has been reported as being severely non-compliant with EPA standards?
In Fairfield County, we don't have good enough air quality, and it's because we are kind of downstream in the tailpipe of the northeastern United States, and we need our federal representation to stand up strong to ensure that there isn't excessive air pollution from the surrounding states, because we're downstream from that because of the jet stream. I've also co-authored and passed in Senate Bill 7 last year, and all of the above are moving our state to said aforementioned all of the above clean energy strategy by placing hydropower, certain forms of hydropower, and all forms of new nuclear production on equal playing field with wind and solar and other forms of zero carbon energy. That will ensure that we are able to protect our environment, clean air, but also do so in a way that's reliable and protects the stability of the grid, while also ensuring that we're able to deliver electricity in a more affordable fashion. I was also generally supportive of the governor's bill to give municipalities the tools to do adaptation to changing sea levels and other coastal concerns. That was not raised, even though it was a priority Senate bill for the governor by the majority, but it's something that I would have probably generally been supportive of and worked across the aisle to pass.
Thank you. Nick?
I have to circle back to the abortion issue because it is such an important issue to our core values. So I think we just heard one of the most egregious cases of mansplaining about a woman's health issue. The American College of Obstetricians and Gynecologists, the NIH, and Planned Parenthood all said that the procedures in those bills were perfectly healthy and encouraged. So I don't think you or me, as males in our 30s, should be saying that we know more about reproductive health than any of those institutions. So let's leave that there. On clean air, I think there's a saying in politics: follow the hands, not the mouth. That sounded really great, what my opponent was saying, but the clean air bill that was introduced and passed, my opponent voted against. I also think I would like to add on how we're going to, one of the best ways to do this is traffic, right? The biggest source of emissions in the state, in the United States of America, is tailpipe emissions. We have the most congested highway in America between Greenwich and Norwalk. More than Washington, D.C., more than Boston, more than LA. Those cars run through cities, and these cars sit all day long emitting the smog. We have to invest more in transit rail, and we have to invest in fixing I-95, and that's what's going to clean up our air.
Great. Next question is, Nick, affordable housing and zoning and development. You both stated that you're for local control of zoning and development. What ideas would you offer, if it were possible, to keep local control to increase affordable housing? For example, at American Lane here in Backcountry Greenwich, the redevelopment project, though it's not an 830G candidate, the developer contributed to the Greenwich Affordable Housing Trust Fund rather than including affordable units in his building plan. Do you agree with this approach?
So, in the macro view, we have two things that we can simultaneously do at once. We can build more housing in the state, which is going to help grow the economy and provide more opportunity, and also keep local control and empower it even more. So my approach to this issue is to absolutely keep the hands in local control. I would reform, get rid of 830G. I think it is a failed law. Any law that empowers a developer to unilaterally come into a town and build wherever they want is a flawed law. When I was working for the governor, I was really proud to be part of the senior team that helped pass a bill that included $800 million to incentivize new housing in the state. That should be the role of the state, to be incentivizing financially, empowering, and partnering with towns, instead of trying to ram in a one-size-fits-all approach. So towns can come together, they can make their own plans, come to the state, ask for support, and work with developers to do it all together. So I believe deeply in a bottoms-up approach, not top-down, and I really support the governor in using carrots, not sticks.
Thank you. Question back to you.
Thank you. First of all, Nick, I mean, you don't have to use the mansplaining line when Pat Miller is also someone who voted against the bill, and she's a Democrat, and there were 15 other Democratic women who voted against the same bill. So we don't need to be glib. Second, I think the leading advocate across the state for local control of zoning. I threatened to filibuster in the closing days of the legislative session this year to stop a bill that would have threatened to take away hundreds of millions of dollars from towns and cities that did not allow developers to build as of right up to 10 units. I've also co-authored and passed two of the only victories for local control of zoning in the past decade in the state. There is a lot of talk at election time of rolling back 830G, but I am one of two legislators in the last several years in the entire state who has actually advanced reforms to 830G to make it easier on towns and cities to get a moratorium. While you were Deputy Chief of Staff in the dead of night, there was a bill passed at the behest of senior Democrats in Stamford to take away the right of municipalities to make any change to their local planning and zoning in their town or city charter under any circumstances. I fought tooth and nail in the following year to get that right to towns and cities back where it belongs with you in Senate Bill 333. It wasn't easy. It's logical that it should have been, but I had to fight tooth and nail to get it. I will always fight for local control of our towns and cities.
Our next question is about water quality and resource management, and Ryan will go first. What is your position on the proposed sale of Aquarian water to the South Regional Water District? And what steps would you take to improve water quality in Greenwich? Handstand.
During the special session this summer, I was one of the most outspoken opponents of a last-minute change to state law that would allow a quasi-government utility, the Regional Water Authority, to bid on and potentially purchase Aquarion, the investor-owned utility that currently serves this region. It was a proposal that was totally out of nowhere from legislative leadership, from the senior elements of the state government, without any consultation, any public debate, any public hearing. And unfortunately, we heard virtual silence from many Fairfield County Democratic legislators. I not only spoke for a long period of time and attempted to change that law, and actually even got some Democratic support for the amendment to change that bill and keep the the current law among the sale of Aquarion, but also I continue to speak out against the acquisition. It would potentially raise water rates by 50% if we are to change the structure of the ownership, according to an analysis done by the Office of Consumer Counsel, the governor's own Office of Consumer Counsel, yet it's still passed. We need to continue to have people who are watchdogs for everyday consumers and residents in this state, not people who will refuse to speak out and talk a good talk about bipartisanship and checks and balances only at election time. This proposed acquisition is wrong.
Yeah, I think there's a good chance we could look back in 20 years and see the quality of our water as being one of the biggest public health issues of our time. We're starting to uncover the PFA crisis that was mentioned before, and how we're seeing it more and more and more and more in water sources all across the country. Not just that, but other chemicals as well. We've not been doing a great job nationally or in the state of truly enforcing and inspecting the quality of our water, and the consequences could be devastating. You look at the rates of development of our children, you look at the rates of cancers that have actually been increasing for people younger than 40 in the United States. So I'm happy to see the EPA federally is taking it more seriously. My heart breaks for the children at Parkway that were drinking PFAs for all this time. We need to invest more in water inspection, absolutely. And do everything we can to solve it, because it's the thing we drink every single day, and it has serious, significant health implications. Thank you.
Next question for Nick regarding traffic and transportation. Touched on this a little earlier. Traffic congestion is growing. It's a growing issue in Greenwich, not only on our streets, but also on the Merritt Parkway and I-95. What specific policies or infrastructure improvements would you prioritize to address the problem of congestion on our streets and the highways?
Yeah. Well, when I knock on doors, this is one of the top issues that I hear. Traffic has gotten so horrible in our town, and it is killing so much of what makes the town great. I mean, it is just agonizing to think that you can get from one side of town in 15 minutes and you're just sitting there for 40 minutes trying to get there. And then all the traffic from I-95 is now backing up the ramps and going on the post road, and it's really soul-crushing for the town. We have the highest percent of commuters of any state senate district in Connecticut, the most congested highway in America. And this has gotten worse and worse and worse and worse and worse every single year. And with all that pain, I'll just call it what it is, I don't think it's an exaggeration. I mean, parents are literally not able to get home to tuck their kids at bed because of how bad this traffic is. That is why, one of the reasons I'm so frustrated. My opponent has put a lot of time up in Hartford. He helped take part of a filibustering of the gun safety bill that all of us want. He's spent energy in a lot of different places. I don't understand why he hasn't spent that same kind of energy and effort. Why hasn't he lied down on the Senate floor and said, I'm not leaving until we get the money we need from Hartford to fix this problem? The Department of Transportation spends over $1 billion a year on projects. This has nothing to do with tolls. They're sending the money to Meriden, to Waterbury, they're sending it to the New London Bridge. I just can't believe that this hasn't been a top priority, and it's going to be my top priority in the state Senate.
The Department of Transportation is in the executive branch of the state government. The Deputy Chief of Staff to the Governor has cognizance over the departments in the executive branch of the state government. My opponent literally had much more capability of changing Department of Transportation investments in Connecticut in order to alleviate traffic problems than he ever will as the 27th senator, the most junior senator in the caucus of the Democratic Party in the Senate. I mean, the state needs to be prioritizing the alleviation of traffic and the improvement of the corridors here in Southwest Connecticut. It's the top priority. Yet in the Transportation Committee, we would get proposals for things like diverting funding to Shoreline East or the Hartford line, which are subsidized 10 times more per ride than Metro North. I want to focus the resources here on the tax base, the economic engine of our state. We should look at elongating and improving on and off ramp flows in the major highway corridors here in Southwest Connecticut. Those should be the types of priorities that we have. And yet, the leadership of the state government, including my opponent, when they're in positions of power, do not make those primary investments. In fact, the problems have gotten worse. I will continue to fight for prioritizing funding to the economic engine of this state, which is Southwestern Connecticut.
Ryan, next question is for Ryan regarding flooding and climate resilience. Greenwich's shoreline is a gem of a natural resource for its residents. However, we know that the next superstorm could be right around the corner, and that a storm surge and flooding can cause massive damage to our town. What proactive measures would you take to improve infrastructure and protect Greenwich from potential flooding like we've seen in other parts of the country?
As I mentioned earlier, I was supportive of the governor's bill, Senate Bill 11, which would have been a climate and shoreline resilience proposal to prioritize those types of resources to shoreline communities. I also think it's important to reform some of the rules at the state level, which make it exorbitantly expensive on municipalities and on our state to make these vital infrastructure investments. As Tina Corpus mentioned, project labor agreements and study after study are found to inflate the costs of vital infrastructure in our state by 20, 30, even 40%. That means you could build 3 schools instead of 2 for the same amount of money, for instance. That means that you could actually improve flooding infrastructure and climate and shoreline resilience in our district in an affordable manner and in an efficacious manner. That as soon as I was elected, there was a historic flood in Pembroke, and I was down knocking on doors in order to inform the residents there how they could get resources from the federal or the state or the local government. I am in favor of making the right investments in an effective way in order to alleviate any of the flooding any of the negative consequences to the shoreline, including in Greenwich.
So this is all infrastructure questions, and this is really, really, really important, right? My opponent just mentioned priorities, getting things done, being a bipartisan problem solver. What have you done on getting this money? We are suffering here. We are the most congested highway in America. The air is horrible. Parents are sitting on Metro North, not able to get to where they need to go. The highway, it takes 90 minutes in which should take 20 minutes. And you've been, calling yourself a leader up there. You're fighting like hell to get things done. You got these things done. Just what have you done? What are the efforts that you have put in to actually get this problem solved and get the money? It's not until we had 3 Democratic state reps, Hector, Rachel, and Steve Meskers, that we finally got back that $100 million for the Glenville corridor, finally for Central Middle School, which needed to be rebuilt 20 years ago. There's a reimbursement rate. It's pretty simple. You just go into the legislature and you use every piece of political capital that you have to make sure that you get the things, even in the minority, that matter. And I haven't seen or heard a single thing on Central Middle School until after Hector and Rachel and Steve secured the money. Those were our kids sitting in buildings that are crumbling. When the earthquake happened earlier this year, they couldn't even learn in the building. The kids had to leave and learn outside of Central Middle School. And you certainly spent some capital trying to kill the gun safety bill, which we all want, mostly. I just wish some of that energy could be put in there fighting like hell on some of our biggest problems that affect all of us.
Questions that are meant about school funding. How would you ensure that Greenwich schools receive adequate funding, and what policies would you support to maintain a high-quality education for the town and keep our schools safe?
Well, first thing, just building on what I was saying before, Central Middle School, we finally got the funding thanks to our Democratic state reps. Old Greenwich School is next, then Riverside, then a lot of others. So we have to get that funding. We have to make sure we get it. By the way, folks, this isn't more Hartford spending. It is being spent already. We need to fight for our portion of it. That's something we've lacked for a long time. But on education in general, I'm really proud to have been a 7th grade math teacher, to be an acting school principal in Harlem, New York. I saw what can happen when great schools wrap their arms around kids and set them up for success. One of my favorite students named Mokhtar. His family immigrated to the United States from West Africa. He was living in a homeless shelter when I was teaching him. I got to move Mokhtar into his dorm at MIT. One of the best days of my life. So there's so much that we can do. We need to increase after-school funding so that every kid can have access to after-school. 65% of the achievement gap in Connecticut is caused by what happens after school and the opportunities kids do or do not have. Same thing with summer programming. We need to do more to empower and equip our teachers. The rates of mental health of young people are as today as bad as they've ever been. And we need to, I think on the funding side, we do get our fair share, but I think that we need to empower parents to be able to choose the school that they want best for their kids. Thank you.
Well, in the last 2 years, I was proud to bring back millions of dollars through budget negotiations to our district. I was also proud to advocate for both to leadership behind closed doors, but also on the Senate floor for funding for Central Middle School, and will continue to advocate in years to come to reimburse our towns to build the infrastructure and the schools we need. I also think it's necessary to point out that in order to make these investments in an efficient manner and maximize the amount of infrastructure we can build, whether it's schools or our roads and bridges, we're going to have to reform state rules that make Connecticut have the 2nd or the 3rd highest per mile of road building costs in the entire country, according to the National Association of State Budget Offices. That means reforming things like project labor agreements, which a study out of Massachusetts says raises building costs by 30 to 40%. Again, you reform that, that means you could build 3 schools in Greenwich, the same cost as building 2 with those regulations. We also need a long-term strategy to make every kid in this state have a great education available to them. That means more school choice for kids stuck in failing schools and supporting choice schools, public choice schools like the Stanford Charter School for Excellence. It means a high level of standards for everybody, because the soft bigotry of those expectations is a real problem. I believe we need to do more to deliver a great education to every single kid in this state, no matter their circumstances.
So last question regarding school safety and guns. School shootings have become almost commonplace in our country. It almost doesn't shock us anymore when we hear about a school shooting. How would you ensure that our children will never be victims of a school shooting? Should the state fund metal detectors in our schools? Should we have stronger gun safety laws, or are our current laws working? Start with Ryan.
I support strong gun safety laws for the state and the rigorous enforcement of those laws. I also co-introduced an amendment and a bill in order to increase the number of school resource officers across our state in order to protect our kids in the worst possible of circumstances. That proposal was voted down on party lines while Nick was the deputy chief of staff in the state government. This is a common sense approach that should have bipartisan support in the worst of all circumstances, and it makes sense because schools during the school day are a large concentration of our most vulnerable population, and yet the state does not provide and continues to not provide support for school resource officers. They've worked well here in Greenwich in the public schools. I remember when I was a senior, it was the first time we got a school resource officer at Greenwich High School. We should have them at every school, but the state needs to step up, and the Democratic Party in Hartford needs to stop its opposition to common sense safety policies. I support our state's automatic weapons ban that's over 10 years old that Senator Scott Frantz, who's in the room, took part in passing. I support the enforcement of strong gun laws in our state, yet 75% of gun charges in our state get dropped or dismissed by the state government. I support proactive policing policies like consent searches, which have been responsible for taking illegal guns off the street, but were eliminated by the 2020 police reform. I'm proud of the endorsement of the Stanford Police Association and Fraternal Order of Police because they know I will fight for public safety for all. Thank you.
This is where it is so important for the accountability to kick in. It really, really is. First of all the data and research says that school resource officers have no role and are completely ineffective in preventing a school shooting. Look at the last 15 major school shootings in the United States. Every single one of those schools had a school resource officer. You're talking about somebody coming in with an assault weapon against a school, sometimes they're not even armed. I mean, it's ridiculous. Second, this record on touting bipartisan leadership on gun safety. You have an F from Connecticut Against Gun Violence. You were endorsed by the most right-wing pro-gun group in the state of Connecticut. You had the opportunity to vote on one of the most comprehensive gun safety bills in America. You didn't just vote no, you took part in a filibuster that lasted until 4 in the morning. 4 in the morning. A young woman who was a survivor of Sandy Hook. She was in the classroom next door, heard the shooting of all of her friends. She's 19 now. She reached out to me and said, "Can I please volunteer on your campaign? I can't believe you're running in a district that's 20 miles from Sandy Hook. And the person that you're running against voted to weaken gun storage laws, which are responsible for 62% of all school shootings. I can't believe you're running against somebody who voted to weaken red flag laws, which would have made sure Adam Lanza never got a gun before Sandy Hook." Republicans almost always stood up for this. Scott Frantz was great on this. Chris Shays was good on this. This is an example of the Republican Party going right wing, and it's costing lives. So there's a lot more to say on this, but we have to have accountability in this conversation.
We have 3 more minutes to run our closing statement. The last part of our forum is closing statements, and we'll go 3 minutes and 30 seconds for each candidate. And we'll start with Nick.
Well, thank you so much again for being here tonight. I hope that I've tried to convey, if I haven't already, that I love Greenwich. This is where I was raised with my 4 siblings. My parents still live in the same house they bought over 50 years ago. They're not going to sell because now they have 6 grandkids back in the area and they want to stay close to them. I know what makes our town great. It's why I decided to come back here. I think there's a little bit of irony I've been seeing in Republican posters across town this election, "Preserve Greenwich" as a slogan. It's a little ironic to me because the things that I always loved about growing up in Greenwich that I want to invest in and preserve are things like making sure that we have schools that are structurally sound. I don't think in 1995 I could have ever imagined that not being a top priority. I want to make sure that we get the money that we need to neglect infrastructure that's falling down. If you look at the flood maps for 20 years from now, 15 years from now, Todd's Point, underwater. I want to make sure that we preserve that we keep that. We need the money to invest in that. And finally, I just want to get back to the common sense middle ground where we know 60 to 70% of our town lives. Like I said, I grew up to a moderate Republican. I worshiped George Herbert Walker Bush. I interned for Chris Shays. This was a town and a party that always tended to prioritize things like gun safety laws, things like the right to choose, and I just couldn't even imagine what those folks would say to somebody like Donald Trump winning a primary in 1995. It's unthinkable to me that this has been embraced. It's unthinkable to me, and I hope by the end of the campaign, my opponent can just simply say, I support him, I don't support him. But we should stand up to this evil force that is taking over our country. And a place like Greenwich has always done that before. So I think we need the leadership to do that. So thank you so much again for having me. I don't have much more to say than that. We'll have a few more conversations after this, but looking forward to a great election. So thank you.
Thank you to the Round Hill Association and thank you to all of you for attending. Representing this district for the last 3 years, my home has been the honor of a lifetime, and I am truly proud of my record of hard work in order to bring people together during divisive times to solve problems, to protect our district and make our state a better place. I'm proud that I co-authored some of the most rigorous, strong utilities oversight legislation in the entire country and passed it into law so Eversource can't take advantage of us. I'm proud of the fact that I co-introduced and passed an historic expansion of birth control access in Connecticut so women's reproductive care can be more accessible. I'm proud of the fact that I worked across the aisle to deliver the first victory for local control of our planning and zoning in a decade in this state. A lot of people will say things on a campaign trail, but that's a record you can be proud of. And I will continue to fight for this district every single day in the state Senate. Rhetoric at campaign time can get very hot. People can eschew the truth, eschew positivity, simply because of the desire to win an election. I am focused on a positive message. I don't think you can simply say we need to bring people together while running a campaign based on negativity and attacks. I will continue to focus on a positive record for this district and for this state. I will continue to work across the aisle and bring people together in order to improve the future for all our families. Some people want the title of senator. I just want to do the job. And I've done the job to the best of my ability for the last 2 years and will continue to in the future. There is still a lot of work to be done. We need balance in our state government. We cannot have 70 or 75% majorities of one party. If that goes in either direction, we'll have negative consequences. But if we bring people together, I do believe the future can be brighter for our state. I believe we can bring people together in order to cut taxes by $2,000 for the average family in our district and cap property taxes. I believe that we can bring people together to pass comprehensive energy legislation to reduce electricity bills by almost $500 per year. I believe we can bring people together to protect the public safety and give police tools to take illegal guns off the street and keep everybody safe. I believe that we can bring people together to protect our time-honored traditions of local control over planning and zoning in order to ensure that high-rises and developers do not take over Greenwich or any other town or city in this state. And finally, I believe in a more constructive, more positive politics. I believe that the best days for this town and this city can be ahead of it. if only we do the hard work of finding common ground, bringing people together, focusing on the issues, and believing that the future can be brighter than today. Thank you all, and I ask for your vote on November 8th.